Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Irenee Moon, and this is Not Your Daddy's Metal Podcast. So we are back here for week 2 with podcast number 2. Last week I was trying to get this up, and I've had to come back and re-record what I had last week. I'm having a lot of technical difficulties. I'm trying to establish what I'm doing here with my electronics, and so it was working one time to, use my iPad and just go straight from there and then get my husband to record, or my husband to edit. And then I couldn't transfer my recording and my video. So I had to restart, and this is where we're at. So what a good week. It's been a interesting one, but I'm glad you guys are back here. I am so happy to just be able to talk about this again. I mean, I don't know. So, but I'm glad you're back, and I'm glad we've got a second podcast here. Fingers crossed it actually goes through this time. But before we get into it, and before we talk about the creme de la creme today, I have some news. So, my news that I had on my notes for last week were pretty much a simplified version of what I actually found. So I found a list via Loudwire of some new albums and new music that's coming in March. So this podcast will be coming out March 2nd. Today I'm recording it on March 1st. So day 1. This came, I don't know, I can't remember when this... Oh no, I guess it did come out today, this list. But I'm going to read off the list for you. And I hope some of you guys are happy because I'm excited for some of these. So we have Evanescence is coming out with one. Chevelle, A Day to Remember, Demon Hunter, Insane Clown Posse, Nightfall, The Crown, Dead Poet Society, Eyehategod, which is I'm pumped for that. I'm pumped for Rob Zombie to come out with one. Seri Tankian, I don't know who that is. Saxon, Liquid Tension Experiment, I'm excited about that one. Genghis Tron, I'm kind of excited about them too, just because I was I actually recently just got into them and just started listening, so that's kind of cool. Smith and Kotzen, Sanuisugabogg, I don't know who that is. Budderside and Citizen. So just in the description box below, or in the comments below, tell me who you guys are excited for out of that list. I mean, Evanescence at the same time, I grew up listening to Evanescence, so I'm also excited to see what they pull out. But Eyehategod is a band that I love. They came to Saskatoon, and that's where I'm from, and I kid you not, I am so mad that I didn't get to see them. So yeah, I'm really kicking myself on that one, but we were moving in that process, so I missed out. I really did miss out. But in other words, out of that list, actually, when I'm reviewing my notes now, they didn't actually have this other information that I got here. We have Slipknot also coming out with some big news. I haven't seen much on that since I saw that last week. If there is news that you know about and I just missed that, let me know. I haven't heard anything, but I hadn't digged since then. But in other words, Gajora actually dropped some EPs, and they're coming out with a new album. I didn't know that was coming earlier on in the year, and so I'm super stoked about that. I listened to the album, the EPs that they had, and I actually thought they put out the album. So then I was listening, and then all of a sudden it repeated those songs, and I was like, what the heck? And then I'm oh wait, it's just the EPs. But I am super excited about that. And actually an album that came out, and if you guys don't know, Love and Death came out with their new album, Perfectly Preserved. And if you guys don't know who Love and Death is, that's actually Brian Head Welsh from Korn. He kind of did his own segment when he was on his years away from Korn. It's actually a decent album, and I was listening to it, and Love and Death is pretty good. He kind of outlines his own book, through his own biography with Eyes Wide Open. And he talks about his walk with Love and Death and how he had started it, and how it was it was interesting because he's not a singer with Korn, but then he stepped into the headlight with into being the front man for Love and Death. So it was kind of interesting to see, but this album is pretty good. If you guys like Korn, it's a little bit of a twist on Korn, but yeah. So guys, I would highly recommend you guys check out those tracks that are coming, that I've explained, and also look into the future about the bands that are coming out with some albums this March, right in like this month. That's exciting. So that's big news for us. But yeah, so that's the news that I have for this week. I'm actually going to do a bit of a segment on my next podcast about like 2020's Metal Hammer artists, and kind of be like my review on it. I went and bought this magazine. So my outings that I've been able to take, I went to Indigo and I bought Metal Hammer magazine, and I brought it home and I had set it on the floor, and of course my cat, who loves to knock over cups, knocked over a cup of water right onto my magazine. Thankfully, it's still okay, but I want to review what Metal Hammer says about the best, or their thoughts of the best in 2020. And then I'll get back to you. So yeah, I'm excited about that. But here we go. We will get into our artist of my second favorite artist of all time. So my second favorite, next to Devin Townsend Project, is Myrkur. If you guys haven't heard her, her real name is actually, I think it's Emily Braun. I think that's how you pronounce it. Emile or Emily. Yeah. I'm really bad with names and pronunciation. Even though I'm an English major, I don't pronounce things well. But she is also hailed from, she is hailed from Copenhagen, Denmark. She was masked actually behind just the name Myrkur for a while. And many of her projects kind of went under that, which I'll talk about later. But so she didn't say who she was, which is kind of cool in the same route. And like, you know, so we see that from bands like Def Punk, you know, some bands who want to keep their anonymity and just live, which is cool. Like, truthfully, I would possibly want to do that because fame is a different route. So it's cool that like she did that, but then of course later on then we find out who she is, and now she's living her life just as Myrkur, but also under her, you know, given name. So her genre and her music genre falls under a series of things. She kind of branches from like one side to the next, which is cool, and that's what I like about her, is that she presents a lot of different things. She falls in the genre of like folk rock, black metal, and gothic metal. I personally would like see her in death, but black is kind of the major genre that I also do like listening to, but death is like very signified of like the words we're talking about, or like the lyrics per se, than like the atmosphere, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, I genuinely love listening to that kind of genre. Like black metal is one of my favorites, so that's why it pulled me to her. So I'm just gonna step right into her CD and her discography. Her first one, which is under her you know, I don't know what the synonym, whatever the hidden, just under Myrkur. She had it was in 2015. It's titled under M, which also is just Myrkur. We don't know who she is. Her black metal presentation is what makes us fall in love with her right off the bat. So, and I understand why artists do this. They want us to like love their music first before they love the artist, because if you're an aesthetic person, you like seeing what that person looks like, and then immediately like, I don't like them, or I don't, you know, like, so it's kind of, there's a debate about it, but I think why a lot of people fell in love with it was because it's very anonymous. I personally think that maybe this was a possible resurrection of black metal in Denmark, but I'm just kidding. That's a lot of people are going to debate that. But some sources that I did find actually said that this was possibly the second wave of black metal, because it kind of died off for a few years. You don't really hear of too many Denmark bands that are coming out as like in the black metal scene, and even in the gothic metal, like we don't hear of big headliners as much. So then when she came forth, it was like, yeah, like we just get this like low guttural yell from the north. But that mix between gothic and black is a very beautiful engagement. But it does come down to the aesthetics and the atmosphere. Gothic is very driven on atmosphere, and you can see in her cover art, you can see in just who she is later on when she kind of like presents the stuff, that it's just a very Gothic idea. And like if you research a lot of like stuff from Denmark and from Scandinavia and like authors, you know, Hans Andersen, a lot of that stuff is a very Gothic undertone. So she's driven by these kind of what I don't want to say aesthetic again, but she's driven by these undertones and this Gothic atmosphere that presents itself and hovers over, you know, Scandinavia as a whole. But in this album is actually in Danish, quite a lot of Danish, and yet regardless of it being in Danish, we still can hear the presence of just an absolutely guttural, like black metal that's just, we're used to it, and then you hear it again come out in Danish, and it's such a beautiful like nuance, and so it gives us a dark descent into the madness that we always wanted. So that's why I think I really do like this album. It's not my favorite of hers, but I'll go into the next one, which is my favorite. So Myrkur, the pronunciation in Danish is wrong. I listened to it several times on Google to try and figure it out, but in essence it's just Myrkur. And that was in 2017, and it's my favorite album of hers, like flat out. This album's title is actually Danish for the word nightmare. And it also references in like loosely sleep paralysis. She was actually personally plagued with sleep paralysis for a time, and so she journaled it and in turn wrote about it in this album, because it comes to that aesthetic and like that deep darkish nightmare that comes with atmosphere as well. So like in one of her songs, Jørvid, I think is how it's pronounced, that one heralds to like the Norway's mountains and stuff. So you get that sense of like worldly unknownness within her work. So it's really cool. But I like what Metal Hammer said about this album, is that it leans mostly towards an earthy Gothic folk of like Chelsea Wolfe with the post-black metal. Actually Chelsea Wolfe does feature in this, so that's why it's like, oh, it makes sense. And so then, like I said, my favorite song was Jørvid. Her vocals are like absolutely phenomenal. If you guys don't like women screaming, which some people don't, I've heard big metalheads say they don't like listening to women scream. It's just this like, I don't know, it is unnerving, and it's very like, it's not scary, but it's just haunting. And her vocals and her scream just, it sets that tone, and it sets that atmosphere and that nature. Because if I don't watch much, like I don't watch music videos these days, and I grew up listening to much music, or like watching much music and like all that kind of stuff, like Jackass, all that fun stuff. But the music video for Jørvid is so beautiful and unnerving at the same time. Like she's in Norway, and she's singing in like just in the beautiful scenery that's there, singing about the Norway, like the Norwegian mountains, and it's very Gothic. And I think we have a certain perspective that everything has to be super dark, yet we get the backdrop of like nature, and we always think nature is so beautiful, but yet at the same time nature doesn't give a shit about us. So it's going to treat us like it always will, and it's just, we're in it, we're in the atmosphere, we're in nature, and so we feel it so deeply in this music that we come to understand where like if you listen to like a lot of Norse metal, or if you research a bit of like Nordic, you know, influencers, or like Norse, actually if you look very much at like the Norse writing and like novelists like Stig Larsson for himself, and a lot of like other writers, I think it's Lars Larsson, but like if you look at like mystery writers of like, you know, Scandinavia, they're very dark. So they've had to experience dark winters, all just like us Canadians, but there is that very dark presence. So when you listen even to artists, it's just this raw presence and absolute beauty that we get from it. Then we get her shift. So we get Folkslang, which was put out in 2020, and this is her folk rock. We all still want that bit of darkness, and we do see that she still brings it in her voice. What she talks about is is very mythical and like Scandinavian paganism in her stuff. My husband actually thought one of the songs was from Skyrim. He's like, she stole that from Skyrim. That's a Skyrim song. I was like, no, like, but I was like, if you listen to like pagan music and like all that kind of stuff, you're gonna get, or not even pagan music. If you get Norse music, you're gonna get a bit of Skyrim to it. So it does sound very like Skyrim. So if you like this soundtrack from Skyrim, you'll like this album. It's really good. But truthfully, it is like the perfect soundtrack for like those types of games in general. So, but the song Leaves of Yggdrasil is probably my favorite on that album. Like it's so phenomenal. And then another really good song is, Gudrun's Village. I think that's how you pronounce it. And that's the song that particularly sounds like Skyrim. But I do encourage you guys to listen to this. If you guys are into the heavy devy stuff, this one's not going to be typically for you, but if you like listening to all types of metal and bridging into like a little bit of the folk rock and like that kind of stuff, you're going to like it. It's a new perspective on metal music in a way. I still consider it metal because she's still using that gothic rock in a way. But then she actually put out a series of EPs and singles that came along with her album. But then two songs that I do particularly like that she didn't put on any albums was Juniper, which was in 2018. And then another song which was in Danish. Juniper was in English. And Boden og Kragen was in 2018 as well, but that one was in Danish. Her other albums, Myrkur, is partly in English and Danish, and then Folkslang is similar. It's in English and Danish. So one of the reasons that I fell in love with Myrkur, I think, was in kind of the influences that bled into her music, and the influences are like Norwegian, Scandinavian culture. I was on a search for my Norwegian side as well as my Scandinavian side. I am Danish, sorry. Also like just a pure Scandinavian. But I wanted to be able to find a little bit of culture in myself. My family came to Canada. They didn't practice a lot of like their culture. And so we see that in people who move different countries. You kind of lose yourself. And that's why like this idea of like whitewashing everything. And of course at the same time, Scandinavia is very white, other than their, I believe you would pronounce them as Sami. It's S-A-M-I. I don't know how to pronounce them, but or pronounce that culture of people, but they're the indigenous people in Sweden. So, but at the same time, I was trying to find my history that, is not necessarily lost to me yet, but I wanted to be able to find something that I could call my own. And I'm also looking into, I have a very deep problem based in my personality. So I think finding looking to music sometimes is really helpful in that retrospect. And because of the dark presence of metal, and especially black and death metal, I was drawn to it. And I was going through a hard time. And so this type of music was like perfect for it. I did watch an interview that she was actually searching through records, and I will try to find that video for you guys, but they were interviewing her on her choices of music and her choices of records. And she picked Portal, which if you haven't heard of Portal, I highly suggest you do. They are awesome. It's a different style. I'm not going to explain much about them, but just go look them up. They're interesting. And then ABBA. She picked ABBA, and I have listened to ABBA ever since I was younger. Like, honestly, like, what's it called? Dancing Queen and all those other songs. Like, it's just amazing. I love ABBA so much. But she said that the lyrics in ABBA music are rather dark, and I'm like, what? Like Dancing Queen? Like, are you serious? But she said when you think about it, it brings it like she's coming from Scandinavia. She's coming from Denmark, and she has a different perspective on the writing itself of many Scandinavian writers, and especially in Scandinavian music. So she would have a different insight, which is interesting to see. And, you know, you have a different perspective when you listen to ABBA after that. But there are some songs that I'm like, I can catch what you're meaning here. Some of the other songs, like these poppier ones, no, I wouldn't consider them to be overly dark. But some of the not so known ABBA music, I would consider what Myrkur is talking about here is that it has this dark precedence to it. But in my search for my Nordic roots, I did come across Myrkur. She's relatively new and upcoming. Like I said, her first album came out in 2015. I didn't know her then. That's when I got married, for goodness sakes. I wasn't worried about looking for music at this point. But there is very something specific when it comes to the black and the darkness of winter. And I think if you live in the northern parts of the world, like Canada, like Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, all these other areas, if you're accustomed to the cold, dark winters, this type of music resonates with you so well. And that's why it resonated with me, is because I was also going through a very dark time, and I find music really speaks to me. And so some of the stuff that I was listening to was like not necessarily intense, but it drives home this like sense of being, and that's why I'm so driven to death metal, is that this kind of symbolism that we hear and the very aggression of like life itself comes from that. But I think in retrospect, I was all like, this is where I pair it with. I don't want to pair philosophy with music a lot of the times, but you hear it. You hear a lot of philosophy in metal music, which is, people are always like, oh, metal music is just about like slamming, you know, beers and hating women, hating the church. But there is a deep sense of the philosophy that comes from this. And I was really diving into this essence of like nihilism. And so I was really at the threshold of absurdity to me, which, you know, isn't necessarily nihilism, that's absurdism. But I was put into the place of oblivion. And so I was driving into, and I was listening to a lot of death metal at that point and black metal, and it was driving in that same sense of like, this is what life is like, this is what the world is like. And yeah, as shitty as it is, it's still life, we still have it, but we can still find joy in music and still scream at life. And that's why I like her music, and I like her singing. I like her screams, because it makes me feel a sense of relief, because I want to scream with her too. And I often do when I'm in the car. When it comes to that, like her screams in the songs, I scream along with her, and there'll be people being like, what are you doing? But so I'm really glad that Myrkur fell in love with death metal, or into black metal, which she said she has in many interviews. I'm really glad she did, because it got me into black metal. She would have probably been the person that brought me at the doors of black metal. So I'm really glad that she brought me there, because now I'm on this path of just like the ultimate search, you know, and it's fun. It's been a lot of fun looking, you know, into the path of unrighteousness, if you want to put it that. But yeah, so this week has been awesome. It's actually been a shorter. The original recording that I had for this, it was long. Like, I thought this one was gonna be a lot longer, but I am going to next week I'm going to be going into a deep dive into all of the genres, the subgenres of metal. But I'm going to label everything out. I'm going to try to make a big chart for you within these podcasts. So I'm going to try to do like the starting half, and then go to the second half, and then dive into the subgenres maybe, or just kind of all label it together. So I'll be like, okay, here is black metal. What do we get out of that? And then like, what subgenres do we get out of like extreme metal? And so we'll just kind of go from there. I'm not going to give a lot of information about each genre from there, because of the main focus that I will be doing that further. So I established to you the timelines we have of like all these genres, and then I'm going to be going into each genre in detail, and then giving you all the bands, all the artists that come from that, and then some songs. You know, I'll be talking about some of my favorites from there, and that's where the true fun comes in. This is where the true research comes in, because here I just wanted to simply establish for you guys my favorites, how you can see me in this retrospective, like what kind of music I really drive into. And I'm not going to necessarily put my specific love into this podcast of like, I'm going to only talk about the bands I like. I'm going to talk about some bands that I don't necessarily enjoy. There are some bands that I don't necessarily listen to, like the classic, you know, metal, like air metal. Well, not like the air spray metal, like Kiss I don't necessarily listen to. I don't necessarily listen to Metallica, Iron Maiden, like those guys. There's been a lot around them and a lot like circling around them. I've branched out from there because I'm in the newer genre of metal. I grew up listening to all of that, so I enjoyed it growing up. But then you kind of like step forward and you find your own stuff because you're not forced to listen to it in the car on repeat by your dad, you know. But those kinds of like that kind of metal I don't necessarily listen to, and even some of the modern day stuff like what can I even say? Who would I don't know. I guess I'll establish it later. I can't think off the cuff of like I don't want to offend anybody either. But Cannibal Corpse is like probably one of my like touch and go. Like it's not one of those bands I listen to all the time, but it's not one of the bands that I absolutely hate or like. They're kind of that in between for me. I love Cattle Decapitation. I might have said this before, but Cattle Decap is like a big favorite of mine. Aborted is a really good one that I love listening to. Eyehategod that I was saying. Then we get into this realm of progressive metal. I love progressive metal. Opeth is like, oh, I love Opeth. And I really do enjoy... Porcupine Tree is kind of on that, like, gap. I do like listening to Porcupine Tree. They're kind of a touch and go. I just kind of... I bring them back into the atmosphere if I need to listen to it a little bit. And Dimmu Borgir is a big one that I like listening to. Their older stuff. I'm not... Like, their new stuff is good. It's a very driving metal. Like, it's... within the progression... Like, within the progressive metal of, like, driving... Like, you know, symphonic metal, I guess is what we consider them. And I do like listening to them a lot. There was a trip that me and my husband took and we listened to Dimmu Borgir quite a bit. And my husband was like, you can just tell how the song's gonna go. But yeah, so I'm gonna go... Now we're going to be moving into the series of our genres and subgenres. Lots of people like to argue about subgenres and the need for them. And I can understand why people get like really aggressive when it comes to subgenres and they're like, we don't need this anymore. Why do we need another subgenre? Why do we need another tier of like the second wave of Danish black metal? Like, people get very heated about it, and there is there's a forum that I've been like kind of looking back on, and people are like hating on this fact of like all of these subgenres, and they get pissed off about it. But at the same time, I think our well-established subgenres are very nice to list, like just to establish, because you kind of get a new tone out of another one, and it's fun to research. But I do see the point where it's like, at what point do we stop? Like, how many more like different variations of black metal do we need? Like, how many variations of like progressive metal do we need? You know, it gets to the point where it's like, let's just relax and we don't have to label these guys. They're coming out with new sounds. Like, they're experimenting, because that's the same with like Devin Townsend. We talked about them last week, or talked about like his band, how every genre kind of touches Devin's like band and like you know, his themes, not even his themes, his sounds. And in retrospect, it's fun to see bands that do that, but then at the same time it's like you want to label them, because the people are like, what kind of metal do you listen to? And then you're like, well, I kind of listen to a shit ton of everything. And people are like, no, you need to tell me what you listen to. So it's fine to just, you know, kind of deep dive a little bit and enjoy the ride, but I can understand where the subgenre argument will get a little tense and how it'll get very hard to lose yourself in. So I don't want to get you guys lost, and that's why I'm breaking it into several parts, I think, so we don't get lost in the oblivion. So, yeah, so that's what I have for this week. Now you guys know my top 2 faves and a few of my others. I'm going to probably talk about them a little bit. We'll show where they fall in the subgenres, but yeah, so looking forward, I hope that my technology works. It's a problem. Like, I'm working with a little bit of like a newfangled kind of stuff. I always don't have the actual like good proper mechanics, but my husband, because he does a little bit of this on the side, I'm just gonna go straight from his computer, like recording kind of stuff there. I just wish that I could have had a really like a little bit of a better atmosphere, because I love my record wall. But you guys, I guess, still see it. But yeah, so hopefully in the future I can get back to just my desk, not sitting in his desk, because it does put him out. He wants to be able to do his own things on the computer, and so I'm constantly like working around that. But he will now be, from now on, editing my stuff, because we talked about, me and some friends, we talked about on the side walls of my videos were like this little like bar and like, or almost like this frame. So we're going to try to get that. And so my husband, since he'll be editing my stuff, we won't be having that anymore. So we're going to try to look a little bit more professional. But yeah, so that is it for this week. And I hope to hear from you guys in the comments, my socials. My social media page for this on Instagram is Not Your Daddy's Metal Podcast. Just all in one word. Check me out there. I'm going to try to be a little bit more active. This past week was hard. It was an interesting one. March and February are the absolute pit stains of the winter for me. I struggle with a lot of mental health stuff then, so I just needed to take a week. I'll be honest. And that kind of segues into it. All us metalheads, we understand. We talk about a lot of deep concepts, especially in our music. But on top of that, take your mental health seriously. Like, get help if you need it. I know it's hard. So like I was in that wall for like 3 years where I just absolutely didn't want to function. And it's hard. It's hard getting out of a slump like that and not having the people that you think are there to be able to help you, but there are people out there to help you. And we've got lots of resources. I know in Saskatchewan we are struggling with this concept of mental health, but there are organizations out there designated for that. So if you guys don't know where to go, even in retrospect to that, just reach out to me and I can help you with resources, because that's the last thing I want to hear, is that somebody that is a follower of mine, just in passing, or just hearing somebody commit suicide is a really strong thing for me, working alongside, social issues. So this is my little like segment of like, get your mental health in check. It's a metal thing to do. So, and I will toast a glass of wine to all you guys for a good week. Let's kick this rest of the winter in the ass. If you guys aren't in winter, seasons like us with snow, I hate you all. Just kidding. But if you're going through a slump, wherever you are, let's have a good week, and we'll see you again next time.